What if I told you that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest, the angriest, or the most aggressive, but the quiet one who's been pushed one time too many? The one who never asked for attention, but always absorbed the pain. Stay with me, because what Carl Jung uncovered about human psychology might completely change the way you see empaths forever. Jung believed that every human being contains both light and shadow, but in the empath, that tension burns hotter than most people can even comprehend. Society often confuses empathy with softness, assuming that deep feelers are fragile. But Jung's work showed something much more unsettling, something more dangerous. Because empaths aren't weak, they're restrained. They've been biting their tongue, ignoring the red flags, carrying the weight of others' emotions, until they don't. Jung taught that the psyche is layered. At the top is the persona, the mask we wear for the world. But beneath that mask is something more primal, the shadow, the parts of us we suppress to stay accepted. So what happens when an emotionally intelligent, deeply wounded empath takes that mask off? That's when the shadow steps forward. And it doesn't whisper, it roars. Empaths live in what Jung called the tension of opposites. They can feel agony and still offer kindness. They can see deception and still give trust. This isn't naivety. It's what Jung referred to as the transcendent function, the rare ability to hold two conflicting truths without shattering. But even that has limits, especially when narcissists enter the picture. See, narcissists mistake empathy for permission. They think someone who forgives must be blind. But here's the twist. Empaths evolve. They don't stay in the same emotional space forever. They get smarter, sharper, more selective. Jung believed that true psychological strength comes from facing your own shadow and integrating it. Empaths are forced into this process earlier than most. They go through emotional crucifixion before most people even realize they have wounds. They don't just know the light, they've touched the dark, and they've survived it. That's where narcissists make their fatal miscalculation. They confuse grace with weakness. But empaths who've been broken and rebuilt don't just forgive, Tower. They remember every lie, every manipulation, every dismissal, and they don't forget. They calculate. Eventually, something inside them snaps, but it's not an explosion. It's a transformation. This is what Jung called enantiodromia, the moment when something turns into its opposite, because it's been pushed to the edge. The giver becomes discerning, the forgiver becomes distant. The pleaser walks away. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. Empaths don't lose their hearts. They grow a spine. They don't shut down emotionally. They become precise, strategic, purposeful. Jung believed that this moment is the birth of the authentic self, what he called individuation. Most people tiptoe around their shadow for a lifetime. Empaths confront it head-on, dragged into it by betrayal, humiliation, and emotional warfare. But here's the twist. That pain doesn't break them. It sharpens them. Emotional sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's pattern recognition. Empaths don't just feel, they track. They store everything. And when they awaken, they're not coming back to who they were. They're stepping into who they were always meant to be. And before we go any deeper, let me say something clear. If you've ever been this person, the one who loved too much, forgave too quickly, or stayed too long, hit subscribe right now. Not later, right now. Because this story, it's your story. And the world needs you awake. Narcissists can't manipulate someone who now sees through the game. The traps don't work. The guilt tactics fall flat. The empath doesn't respond the way they used to. They don't even engage, because now they see the truth clearly. And when you see clearly, you don't need to shout, you don't need to argue. You just walk away, and the silence hits harder than any scream ever could. This is what Jung called psychological autonomy, the moment when a person no longer plays the game, not out of defeat, but because they've outgrown the entire system. And if you're still watching but haven't subscribed, ask yourself this. Why wait to understand the part of yourself that's been waiting to be seen? Don't just scroll past this. Join us, subscribe. Comment if this resonates. Because staying silent about your awakening, that's exactly what they want. When an empath reaches this level of clarity, the narcissist is left with nothing. No reaction, no chaos, no fuel. Because the awakened empath doesn't need closure. They are the closure. That's when something eerie starts to shift. They stop being the mirror for other people's pain and become the judge of it. Not out loud, not publicly, but deep inside, there's a recalibration. What used to break them now bores them. What used to make them cry now makes them calculate. The empath becomes emotionally unavailable, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. This is their dark night of the soul. And in Jung's world, this is where the archetype of the wounded healer begins to change into something far more unpredictable. Because when the empath snaps, they don't lash out randomly. They become silent first. And in that silence, something ancient and intelligent begins to speak. No more pleasing, no more chasing, no more guilt. Just a terrifying kind of presence. They begin to remember every moment they betrayed themselves. Every time they said it's okay when it wasn't. Every time they smiled when they wanted to scream. They look back at old texts and realize they were begging to be respected. This time the guilt is for how they treated themselves. And here's the twist. It's not even anger they feel toward others. It's something worse. It's indifference. Carl Jung said, emotion is the chief source of consciousness. There is no change from darkness to light, or from inertia to movement without emotion. So when the empath becomes numb, that's the scariest transformation of all. Because they're not just hurt, they're changing species. Now they don't explain themselves, they don't argue, they just observe. Watch people burn their own bridges, watch manipulators spiral without fuel. Watch narcissists stumble when their favorite puppet refuses to dance. And those who once fed on their light now feel exposed in its absence. This is the turning point, when the empath stops talking and the world gets uncomfortably quiet. The old version of them would have sent paragraphs, apologized, asked if they were okay. But the awakened empath sends nothing. Because the power isn't in words anymore. It's in their withdrawal. They stop being the therapist to the unhealed. They stop romanticizing pain. They stop assigning nobility to suffering. And if you've ever been that person, the one who cared too much, who cried behind closed doors, who carried emotional burdens that weren't yours to begin with, and don't do it for the algorithm. Do it because somewhere deep inside you know you've been ignoring your own power for far too long. You've been quiet long enough. And what happens next is not a revenge arc. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. You don't chase people to prove your worth anymore. You don't get high off breadcrumbs of affection. You don't shrink to keep the peace. You begin to sit with yourself. And at first, it's brutal. There's a detox, an inner war. The ghost of your people-pleasing past tries to resurrect itself, but something within you holds the line. The voice that used to whisper, "Just forgive them," now says, "Let them go." And for the first time, you're not afraid of being alone, you're afraid of going back. You realize that healing isn't about finding better people. It's about becoming the person who no longer tolerates the worst in others. You remember that love isn't measured by how much pain you can endure. It's measured by how much truth you're willing to stand in. And the truth is, most people never change, they just get better at pretending. But not you. Because now, you can see through it. You recognize the patterns. You hear the manipulation inside the apology. You feel the self-interest behind the compliment. Your intuition isn't just a whisper anymore, it's a damn siren. And when the empath snaps, it's not an explosion. It's a quiet refusal to carry anything that was never theirs to begin with. That's the death of the old self, and the birth of something far more dangerous, not to others, but to every lie that ever lived inside you. Want to know what happens when this new version of you walks into the world? Stay with me. And when the empath finally snaps, it doesn't look like screaming, it doesn't look like rage, it looks like stillness. It sounds like silence, it feels like power. That's the part most people miss. See, when a narcissist breaks down, everyone notices. They implode, they cry, they scream, they destroy. It's dramatic, it's loud. But when an empath breaks down, it's quiet. They stop arguing, they stop explaining, they stop caring. And for once, they stop trying to heal people who don't want to be healed. This isn't weakness, this isn't bitterness. This is what Carl Jung would have called a necessary withdrawal of psychic energy. The energy that used to go into pleasing others now goes into building themselves. The energy that was once wasted trying to understand people who thrive on confusion now becomes clarity. And that clarity is lethal. Because for the first time in their life, the empath sees the pattern, the manipulation, the trauma bonds, the cycles, the emotional debts they were tricked into paying. They realized they were the source of stability, love and presence in people's lives, and they were treated like a backup plan. They were the mirror for people who were afraid to look at themselves. But when the empath finally smashes that mirror, those people are forced to see their true face, and they hate it. They'll call the empath cold. They'll say they've changed. They'll say you're not who you used to be. And they're right, because the empath finally realized something. Being nice is not the same as being good. Being quiet is not the same as being safe. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And being the healer in every relationship is not a gift. It's a trap. So they stop playing that role. They walk away from friendships that only survived because of their patience. They let people misunderstand them, disrespect them, even blame them. And they do not flinch. This is when their power becomes real, not loud power, not showy power, but silent, surgical, psychological power. They don't chase, they don't beg, they don't explain. They don't try to fix, they watch. And when people try to get a reaction, nothing. Just calm, deliberate, haunting stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people panic. Because now, the empath sees it all. The lies, the projection, the twisted games, and they respond with nothing. That kind of detachment is terrifying, especially to those who are feeding off the empath's emotions like parasites. But this isn't just about revenge. It's bigger than that. This is about evolution. The empath isn't trying to hurt anyone. They're just done hurting themselves. They've spent years burying their rage, smiling through disrespect, minimizing betrayal, but that energy never disappears. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." That repressed rage, that suppressed truth, that ignored intuition, it was always there. And now it's out, not as violence, not as vengeance, but as boundaries. Firm, unapologetic, no negotiation boundaries. And for the people who used to control the empath, this is hell. Because nothing is more threatening to a manipulator than someone who sees clearly and walks away calmly. So if you're an empath who's finally done explaining, done absorbing, done being the emotional dumpster for broken people, then don't look back. They'll say you've changed. They'll call you selfish. They'll try to guilt you back into the role you've outgrown. But do not bend, because your peace is sacred, your presence is power, and your no is a complete sentence. And if you're someone who's felt every part of this video in your chest, if you've been the quiet one who swallowed the storm, if you've ever had to break your own heart just to stop letting others break it for you, then you already know this wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, and it's time more people saw what happens. On the day the empath snaps, if this message hit you in the gut, then this channel was made for you, so don't scroll past, don't overthink it. Subscribe, tap the bell, leave a comment, even if it's just a dot. And let the algorithm know this message matters, because somewhere out there another empath is on the edge, and this might be the one thing that pulls them back. You're not weak, you were just overused, but not anymore.